Welcome to the chaos sector. We have been granted access into the congressional madhouse, so let's continue to report on what is being debated here. There's always clumps of mud all over these walls, as both Republicans and Democrats sling mud at each other until one is deemed the victor. In today's episode, we have Adam No Good Schiff versus a newcomer in the Republican Party, Wesley Hunt. Give Hunt some time, and we'll give him a nickname. Let's start the match.
I thank the chairman and move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
23 days. That is apparently how long it takes for my Republican colleagues to move on from the tragedy of the shooting in Nashville, during which 3 9-year-old children and 3 adults were slaughtered in their school. We were supposed to hold this markup the very next day, but Republicans pulled it down at the last moment, likely knowing how callous it would seem if they decided to proceed with the markup as planned, or maybe thinking that we would forget what took place in Nashville, the country would forget, but we haven't forgotten. The parents and loved ones of those victims haven't forgotten. We haven't forgotten them. Now, I've heard several arguments by my colleagues about essentially why we should make it easier to kill children, why we should refuse to take any step to make it more difficult to kill children in a mass shooting like we've seen time after time after time. And let me just see if I can articulate some of those arguments. One is, you don't understand guns. You don't understand guns. Well, I'll tell you this. We understand biology. We understand what a high-capacity round does to a child's body. We understand what multiple rounds of an assault weapon projectile can do to tear flesh from the bone. Isn't that enough understanding? What we don't understand...
Now No Good is hitting Republicans where it hurts the most for the nation, and that's children. Within this matrix, though, Republicans have to accept that children are being so-called massacred, and the weapon used is the AR-15. Of course, the narrative is Democrats want to literally ban this weapon, but this is to create the defense of the Second Amendment from Republicans. In actuality, the Democrats want to create a more comprehensive gun safety law that will prevent mass shootings. Both sides can debate and negotiate how you go about doing this, of course, as this will be enforced by the federal government.
Is your blind allegiance to the NRA? What we don't understand is why even the majority of NRA members who support assault weapon bans, why you don't support them. It's not even about the members of the NRA, of course. It's, I guess, about their organizational support or who knows what. We don't understand that blind allegiance to the NRA. Another argument we hear from our colleagues on the other side of the aisle is because the law won't stop all gun violence, it's just not worth doing. If we can't save all lives, it's not worth saving a single life. Well, I suppose that logic works until that single life is your own, or maybe it's your child. But why is it so hard to step into the shoes of someone who's lost a loved one from gun violence? Don't you think we would feel differently if that had happened to one of our family?
Now Adam Schiff is literally a piece of crap. He is one of the most corrupt individuals in government this country has ever known. But, with even this, Schiff is at least presenting logic and concern regarding gun violence. Now keep in mind, this is all based on so-called mass shootings in the Matrix. The main point here is mentioning how a Republican's life, or view on semi-automatic rifles, or quote assault rifles, would change if someone close to them were to be murdered by one of these so-called mass shooters. It's a very important, unfortunate hypothetical scenario, as it puts things in perspective for Republicans. Stepping outside of the political madhouse of mudslinging against Democrats, it creates a realization of how such a tragedy could put them in the shoes of those family members of the so-called victims of the so-called mass shootings. Schiff is without a doubt an immoral creature, but he is also very cunning and psychological.
And finally, we hear the argument that nothing really works. No gun safety laws really work. Nothing works. We're powerless. And so we don't have to do anything. But of course, when you look at other countries that have enacted laws, they have made their people more safe. There's a reason why the United States is alone in the world with the magnitude of gun violence. There are, in fact, things we can do that provably make our country more safe and better protect the lives of our children. We just don't have the will. We just don't have the courage. And so we see gun tragedy after gun tragedy after gun tragedy.
No Good actually told the truth. Yeah, it's historical. Both sides don't have the courage. Universal background checks for every state, and that's including the wacky state of Texas. Yeah, you guys are not special. Mental health background checks for every state, which will weed out many of these psychopaths running around with firearms. Any attempt at a purchase of a semi-automatic rifle will be screened by the FBI and the ATF to ensure the individual is not a threat to society. No Second Amendment right violated, no guns garnished from law-abiding citizens, everyone comes out with a fair exchange. And more importantly, it heals the wounds of gun violence, right? What is so difficult with this gun legislation? Why can't both sides agree with this? It seems the Republicans are not willing to agree here because the Democrats would gladly accept these terms. But don't fall asleep, that's the representation of the Democratic Party regarding guns, not the actual proposals being presented. We're just analyzing this nonsense to expose all of the bogery, so stay sharp.
I'm so fed up with a lack of courage here. I'm sick of thoughts and prayers, and the slaughter continues. We are not powerless to do something here. If we had a little courage, we could save lives. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hunt, is recognized.
Looks like the last word.
Gentleman's recognized.
As a father of 3 young children, I'm deeply wounded by the horrific tragedy that we saw in Nashville. We saw the lives of 6 people taken, 3 young children. The shooting was reported to police at 10:13 a.m., and the suspect was shot by 2 Nashville police officers at 10:27 a.m. This quick response time saved countless lives is a testament to law enforcement, and we thank them every single day. As a congressman, I want to do everything in my power to protect children all around this country from experiencing something like that again. Unlike my colleagues on the left, I'm different, and I think an actual solution to protect our children is not what's being proposed by the left, nor is it political. It is a clear attempt to erode the Second Amendment rights for law-abiding citizens and AR-15 owners like myself.
Wait a minute, he mentioned a solution. So, he has a solution, right? But notice how he didn't provide a solution, rather went into mudslinging against Democrats? That's the problem, no good state on the subject matter at hand, and that's gun control. He mentioned Republicans, but he wanted to establish a need for a change to gun laws. Wesley Hunt, on the other hand, immediately went into attacking Democrats. You present your solution to the problem, which acts as a neutralizer to the Democrats' so-called proposal to ban AR-15s. Sprinkle your attacks here and there, but your main focus in the hearing is to provide a solution. It's not about defending the AR-15 against Democrats, it's about protecting the American people. Your job as a congressman is to represent the American people before Congress. And what you are doing is making the American people look as if they only concern themselves with their rights to the weapon, instead of them concerned about how that weapon is being used to so-called massacre children, which are a part of their population. Which one do you think they care for more? Their Second Amendment rights? Or their children? New blood in the Republican Party, and already spewing the same gun nut rhetoric? Wow, give it some time, why don't you?
Every time I walk around this Capitol, I feel extremely safe. I've deployed multiple times. I've been on multiple bases. I think to myself, oh my goodness, hot damn. I don't have to really worry about anything because I'm surrounded by people with guns that want to keep me safe. We have barricades, multiple checkpoints, metal detectors. We are staffed by 2 or 4 police officers at all times. All day there was a gentleman standing at this door in case somebody entered this room with a gun. The U.S. Capitol Police is comprised of more than 2,000 officers and over 350 civilian employees who provide operational and administrative support that has an annual budget of approximately $460 million. And for some of my colleagues, that's still not enough because they have their own private security on top of that, surrounded by people that carry guns. And I can assure you that the people here on the Hill are well protected. What about our school children? This is not a round. This is a pen. Now, one of my staffers tried to bring this pen to my office, and he was stopped by a metal detector, and it went through the x-ray machine, and he was almost tackled by our police services right here at the Capitol, doing their jobs, of course. And we proved that, of course, it was a pen. If a pen that looks like this can't get to my office, then how does a homicidal maniac that has weapons walk into a school and arbitrarily murder innocent children?
Now what Hunt is suggesting is that a mentally ill individual should not have been allowed to purchase the weapons in the first place, right? But this goes back to the original problem, bipartisan negotiations on new gun legislation. He didn't elaborate on that question, in which he's simply alluding to the federal government being held accountable here. Why? Because there is not a nationwide background check mandated for all states, including mental health checks. So we're going in circles around the center of the problem, which is mandatory background checks. Now, why didn't he attach this problem to his question? Because it eliminates the entire charade, that's why. Do you believe Hunt is genuinely asking how a mentally ill person committed the so-called mass shooting? Negative, he knows how it happened, but doesn't want to hold the federal government accountable, rather, attack the Democrats. This is what No Good referred to in mentioning they do not have the courage to fix the problem. To this point, Adam No Good Schiff is winning the battle because he is focusing on the problem, not his political opponent.
Because we wear this pen, that does not make us more important than our children. There's a private school in Houston, Texas, and I was there a few months ago, and I was giving a young man his appointment to West Point. I drove on the campus, and I was met by 2 armed guards. There were parking places that were just for visitors, and they had even more armed guards beyond that. I felt very secure as I drove onto this school. The headmaster or head of school, she met me in the front, and I said, "My God, ma'am, I feel very secure in this place. What's the secret here?" She said, "Wesley, actually, given my religious beliefs, I hate guns. I don't do guns. But it's my responsibility to keep these young people safe. It's not about how I feel about guns or what I think about them or what I do or don't know. I must keep these children safe because they are the most precious things that we have on this earth."
Watch how I dissect his rhetoric, because he basically is contradicting himself. No matter how I feel about guns, I must keep these people safe. Now apply the same dynamic to semi-automatic rifles and children. No matter how Wesley Hunt feels about his guns or his Second Amendment right, he must keep the children safe. Whatever it takes, right? If that means restricting or banning the AR-15 so children can be safe in schools, you do it, right? Nope, the Second Amendment must be protected, despite the consequences in society. Of course that's a bit of a stretch, but the core of his statement applies to the gun control bill being proposed. If you want to be honest, the patriotic duty is being overlooked in this case. A real patriot will lay down their guns to protect the innocent. But if they continue to fight for their guns, they are putting the innocent at risk, due to the lack of federal government intervention with background. You know what that's enough. I would break it all down, but it's kinda pissing me off. I'll let my colleague finish the report.
No problem, let's continue.
I keep hearing this word AR-15s and a weapon of war. I find that funny because, well, I've been to war. And you should Google the AX-64 Delta Apache helicopter. That is what I would call a true weapon of war. But I feel people calling these things a weapon of war, but they've never been to war and they don't know what war is.
Okay, I see why my colleague got agitated. An AR-15 is a civilian version of a weapon of war, the little brother of the AK-47, and other fully automatic assault rifles used by the military. Although it is not fully automatic in its factory state, it can be modified to fully automatic. That's one point. The other point is that the context in which he refers to by the Democrats would classify the AR-15 as a weapon of war. A war against the American population, due to its use by the so-called mass shooters. Isn't this an act of war against the society? Isn't this an act of terrorism? Hunt knows very well why the Democrats refer to the AR-15 as an assault rifle and a weapon of war. No need to go off on a political rant, it's not to your benefit, as you are just entering that madhouse. He is making a rookie mistake by attacking Democrats on their rhetoric. He is not seasoned enough to challenge them yet. Remember, Democrats are very cunning. They will find a crack in your armor and expose you.
And they're using the AR-15 as a scapegoat for everything. I say that because according to the ATF, 6% of homicides are at the hands of AR-15s, 60% at the hands of handguns. So if you really want to have an intellectually honest conversation about homicide reduction, you would go after pistols. But you don't do that because you want to go after the AR-15 first to then eventually get to the pistol to disarm Americans to infringe on our Second Amendment rights. I want you to know something. It ain't the gun. It's the homicidal maniac.
Just accept that the AR-15 in the wrong hands is a severe threat to the population. This is meeting the Democrats in the middle and showing that you are willing to negotiate with them regarding gun legislation. I don't think a single Republican has ever uttered those words in the gun debate. That's a problem. It's a problem, because if you can't admit that the AR-15, the gun, yes, the gun, is a threat to civilians, then obviously you have a bias. If you can point out that handguns make up the majority of gun violence,
Because according to the ATF, 6% of homicides are at the hands of AR-15s, 60% at the hands of handguns. So if you really want to have an intellectually honest conversation about homicide reduction, you would go after pistols.
then you have just focused on the gun itself, not the person. But when it comes to the AR-15, all of a sudden we hear the rhetoric of, quote, it's not the gun that shoots people, it's people who shoot people.
It ain't the gun. It's the homicidal maniac.
Meaning, they use the handgun, in common gun violence, to draw attention away from the AR-15, suggesting that it makes up only a small percentage of gun violence in society. But the problem with that small percentage, it's literally directed towards a specific demographic or setting in society, and that's populated settings. This is technically terrorism, as the so-called shooter seeks out to murder multiple people at a large scale. It's like comparing hundreds of cases of gun violence, where the weapon used was a pistol, to a few cases of bombings that claimed the lives of many people. Those who would defend the right to have bombs would say bombings only make up a small percentage of fatalities in society, while pistols make up the largest percentage. Perhaps a bit of an extreme analogy, but I had to explain it that way so you can grasp the point better. The Republicans understand this, yet deflect from this, by mentioning common handgun violence. A fundamental contradiction of the right, and this is why the left continues to attack the AR-15. The Republicans are very stubborn in their defense of that weapon for some reason, despite it being used predominantly in the so-called mass shootings. The more so-called mass shootings occur, the more Republicans defend the AR-15, and the more Democrats want to ban it. In that context, can you blame Democrats? Well, not really. And for Wesley Hunt to claim the Democrats are trying to disarm the American people is not founded on any empirical proof. It's conjecture, assumptions, and basically propaganda to the conservative base. The word ban is being used out of context. Democrats don't seek to ban the AR-15, they don't have the power to do it. It takes both parties to pass such a law. Although they use the term, they merely mean the federal government would present new laws on preventing dangerous individuals from possessing the weapon. No one should have a problem with this. But listening to Wesley Hunt speak, his body language, and his demeanor, indicates he is simply saying what every other so-called patriotic Republican says. And that's not being an honest politician. In fact, that's the problem, lack of individual character. Spewing your fierce defense of your Second Amendment right is no different than the other conservatives who came before you. Bring change, bring a different conversation to the gun debate, one that changes the dynamic. But when you are just another political asset for your party, you fall right in line with the rest of them. You may be outspoken and depicted as a tough-nosed conservative, but you will always fall short in the gun debate against Democrats. They simply have more relative points that help fix the problem, as opposed to provoking more of it. After all, we don't see Democrats taking photos with their AR-15s. This is the Chaos Sector.